everybody. Welcome to Real Reviews with SOC. Man, I hope and pray that you guys are doing well. For those of you who are brand new to the channel, I want to welcome you to Real Reviews, where we examine film from a Christian perspective and through that Christian lens. We examine all media, film, and all that good stuff. If this is your first time here, again, thank you for stopping by. I want to invite you to like, share, and subscribe the video, subscribe to the channel, and share the video. And hopefully you guys really enjoy the conversation we're going to have today. I do have a special guest on here, but before we get started, I want to let you know what we're doing here today. Today we're going to be reviewing a film by the name of Gattaca. Gattaca is a 1997 American dystopian science fiction thriller film written and directed by Andrew Niccol. Hopefully I pronounced his name correctly, in his filmmaking debut. The film presents a biopunk vision of a future society driven by eugenics, where potential children are conceived through genetic selection to ensure they possess the best hereditary traits of their parents. The film centers on Vincent Freeman, played by Ethan Hawke, who was conceived outside the eugenics program and struggles to overcome genetic discrimination to realize his dream of going into space. The film draws on concerns over reproductive technologies that facilitate eugenics and the possible consequences of such technological developments for society. It also explores the idea of destiny and the ways in which it can and does govern lives. Characters in Gattaca continually battle both with society and with themselves to find their place in the world and who they are destined to be according to their genes. So, again, as you all know, today I'm going to be joined by the apologist in Detroit, which I will let him introduce himself and give you as much detail as possible. Make sure you go and you support him. But without further ado, let me introduce to you my brother in Christ.
Hello, everybody. Happy to be here to talk about one of my favorite movies, to hang out with my brother, servant of Christ, who I don't get to see as much these days, but I'm so happy to be here with him right now. We used to be a dynamic duo back in the days of Bible teaching. So apologistindetroit@gmail.com. That's my email. That's the easy way to get in contact with me if you don't know me. If you know me or know somebody that know me, you might be able to give me a call on the phone. Do not call me on Messenger if you do not know me. Um, I am I'm a missionary to the city of Detroit from my home church, Lake Point Bible Church in a suburb of Detroit. It's kind of like an outreach pastor. We do partnerships with churches in low income areas to do evangelism in those neighborhoods. I work on college campuses. I work. We feed people, we clothe people. Go read Matthew 25:33-40, and that's what we do. That's what we do. That's what we do. We see that as fulfillment of the Great Commission. This is how we show people that Jesus is King, and in Him alone. There's no other name under heaven whereby men must be saved. It's salvation and hope and rescue from the corruption of sin in this world. So yeah, that's what I do. I tell people about Jesus in a variety of forms, and I also do some content, like YouTube with my buddy Matthew Jackson. Frequently with my buddy Phil Fox, Mr. Phil Fox, and Drops of Hope. Occasionally frequently, and occasionally with my buddy SOC, and then occasionally when I'm feeling up to it, I blog and some other places too. You might find, if you just search apologists in Detroit on any search engine, you'll likely find some of my content.
That's awesome, dude. When when we were side by side and I was just talking, nobody could hear me in the chat. I had to rearrange my mic. I was so busy getting your stuff together. I forgot to put my mic into this thing. So hopefully everybody can hear it. If you can hear me, give me a thumbs up. Okay, dude. The first question that I'm going to ask you, brother, because this is not the first time it's not like you just mentioned this film to me and said, hey, we should review this. And then you told me last week, you told me that I want to say maybe season 2 of Real Reviews, and you were like, bro, we got to do this movie, got to do this movie, got to do this movie. But I'm glad I waited because this movie means something to you. So I want to ask you the question, why this film? Out of all the films that you could have chosen as the film that you really wanted to talk about, why this one?
Well, I think if I count the number of times that I've watched this movie, that's probably the tiebreaker for it being like my favorite movie. I've had to have watched this movie a good 20 or 30 times.
Oh,
I
wow.
recommend this movie to a lot of people. This movie is a movie that came out during when I was in college and before I got married, at a very transformative period in my life. I resonated with Vincent Freeman because my plight at the time felt very similar to his, although the context was different. I was working in a suburb of Detroit. Matter of fact, Detroit, Michigan is one of the wealthiest counties in the country. It's up there with like Orange County in California. It's a lot of, it's where like CEOs, because we got like Ford, GM, we got big corporations, Fortune 500 corporations that are headquartered here. So you get a bunch of like executives and things that live here, and people make high salaries. And so this is like the city that these people live in. And I was working out there at Sears at the mall. And and then I that experience working at Sears, I experienced a little bit of like bigotry, a little bit of prejudice, nowhere near significant as, people in the, 50s and 60s and 70s. But nonetheless, it was clear to me that I was being treated differently, likely because of the color of my skin and the residual prejudices remaining from the harsh period of racism in this country. So yeah, it was just a period of time where I really, after a while, it was that, and it was the same time I was falling in love with movies. I had growing up, I was very poor and didn't go to see very many movies. Somehow, as a young teen, I started to hustle and earn money, cutting grass, shoveling snow, doing things, and treated myself to a movie, and I just fell in love with art. In the form of cinema, art in the form of cinema. And so, it was a movie that I saw that really, it was heady, it really made me think. It wasn't just like entertainment. It really felt like this was like an education. So there was so many different, there's so many lines in this movie that are just so poignant and so cause one to introspect, to really think and reflect. I mean, just the scripting of this movie, which I think Andrew Niccol wrote also as well as directed. The script is just so rich and so thoughtful and so poignant. So yeah, it was just a lot of converging factors. Time in my life, me resonating with the main character, a lot of the artistic elements of it. This modern deco, art, the world, like the design of the film, when you go to the doctor's office, when you go to, Vincent's home, which is it's not really Vincent's home. It's what's Jude Law's character's name?
Is it Jerome?
It's Jerome.
Okay.
When you go to Jerome's home, which is, Vincent's, it's like this very sleek, chic looking place. When they go out to very sterile. When they go out to these, but it's like this minimalist, but very, kind of art, kind of reminiscent of the Art Deco period, where like you're literally the building itself is art,
right.
But not necessarily in the stylings of that Art Deco era. It was really more of a modern deco artistic, kind of thing. Anyway, it's just a lot of stuff about the film just kind of converged together and really made this film stick with me, caused me to revisit it. And the more I revisited it, the more I fell in love with it. And it really, and then, as a Christian, there's lots of, analogies that you can draw from this film to use when you're kind of helping teach people. I wish it was more popular, because as many analogies as there is, and it's really not that popular of a film. It was really a bust. In a lot of movies, really good movies back in the 90s were bust and really did well when they went on like VHS and DVD. That's when they kind of gained their cult followings and became like really prominent movies. So yeah, those are like my main reasons for liking the movie. Just really hit me at a really informative time for me, and really spoke to me in a very in a very complex, rich, and formulative way.
Man, that's so really cool. Here's the thing: when you first told me about the film, I have had browsed by the film probably billions of times. All right, so just for anybody in the audience, I actually watched it for the first time as a recommendation because of Chris. So I had never seen the film. Now I've walked by it, I've seen it on Netflix, and I've browsed by it. I saved it, but I never got to finally watch it. Let me tell you something. When I watched this film, I have to say it, Chris, I thanked you. I said, thank you, Chris, because this was a dope film. Because I think a lot of the time, and I'm noticing it more and more, so many of the films today are so heavily driven on special effects and CGI and not so much on just basic good storytelling. And it was very refreshing to me to really watch this film, not worry about action sequences or how well the effects are. The score was absolutely beautiful, and it was perfect throughout the entire film. Not one song, not one composition felt out of place. Everything was perfect. The way it was shot, the way the angles and the camera, everything
Yes.
was great. Them running down the alley. This is the
Yep.
one that comes down my head. When they ran down the alley and they hit over on the side, and his
Yeah.
brother yells at him, I was like,
Yeah.
oh. And he's like, Vincent. And I was like, oh, the way it was shot was just
Yeah.
beautiful. I mean, there's so many little inklings and details like that that just make this film so good. So I definitely want to thank you publicly for introducing me to Gattaca, because is this is something that actually makes me, and my brother in Christ, Nate, is a big advocate. Nate and Benjamin are big advocates of physical media. And because a lot of the time right now, everything is going streaming, and you don't have the physical copy. This makes me want to buy a physical 4K Ultra HD version of this film, because it would be fantastic to even start a collection, because I don't have a large DVD collection because everything has gone to streaming now. So I used to have a lot
Yeah,
of DVDs.
I own a copy of it, but
Uh
I rewatched it this week and I was like, I got to get me a 4K copy of it,
huh.
because you can tell like DVD. It's like the better the TVs get, the worse the like these older
Oh yeah.
DVDs,
Yeah,
get.
it points it out big time, big time.
Yeah,
Okay.
and this is one of those DVDs that you flip over and it's in 4.3 ratio, and you flip it on the other side and it's in widescreen. So yeah, it's like, okay, yeah, this is probably it's probably time for me to get an updated version of this. But yeah, like some of the like I loved how one of the things that spoke to me is like how it opens up with this scene. I mean, this verse from Ecclesiastes 7:13.
Mhm.
Consider what God has done. Who can straighten what God has made crooked? Like I said, there's so many like really, reflective things. Like this seems like a very obscure verse of scripture for anybody to know. And here's
Right.
this film director, a scriptwriter, film director, who pulls out this very obscure verse of scripture and effectively creates a elaborate and alluring story around this obscure scripture,
Mhm.
and then the visual, as you point out, the visuals like this zooming in of all of this DNA falling to the ground, and it's almost disorienting because it looks like snow,
Right.
and it's like flakes of dead skin, and
Uh-huh.
then eventually as they zoom out, you see this giant fingernail boom hit the ground, and the sound effects make it sound like it's this, like you're this tiny person like observing this material, this matter hitting the ground, and then it pulls out and he's like in this shower in this place, and it's like at the time, you got to think this film came out in 1997.
Mhm.
There's nothing visually futuristically visual like it, so it's alluring and disorienting all at the same time, this like opening scene, that, and then the quote from the psychologist, like, oh, human beings are like God left us here to tinker, left us
Oh
here to
yeah.
tinker
Yeah.
and to kind of figure out, and perfect this thing, and there's like this tension between these two notions of like, can we really fix or is what I would beg the question, like, did God make something that was broken?
Right.
Because it's thinking that this presupposing is something that needs to be fixed. And then secondly, that we are called, we are created to fix this thing. Or at the very least driven towards it.
Yeah. So, I mean, that was the thing I wanted to talk about first, because it juxtaposes two quotes. And I thought it was very interesting how it did that. So Ecclesiastes 7:13, it says, God, consider God's handiwork, who can straighten what he hath made crooked. Right. And the fact that you lean into this possibility that they're supposing, or even maybe just trying to push onto people that God made a mistake, and that's why everything is falling apart. And then it shows another quote, and it says, I not only think that we will tamper with Mother Nature, I think Mother wants us to. And
Right.
I was like, ooh, that's creepy. Just because the way the film opened, it's like, oh, here's a biblical statement. Everybody's like, aw, okay. And then it comes in with a creep, like, it wants us to mess with genetics. And I thought it was genius to open up with that, right? Because it puts the audience in the seat of what they are trying to actually push, or trying to push past the audience kind of frontal cortex, their whole thing. So for me, I want to ask you the question, why do you think they put those two quotes behind each other? I want to know your thoughts, at least when you first saw, the scripture and then the other quote come. What were your thoughts about it?
I didn't necessarily, like, originally seeing the movie, and early on it didn't make a lot of sense to me. It makes more sense in retrospect to me. You got to think at and like science has been stretching our understanding of our world and ourselves in leaps and bounds over the last 30, 40 years. And this is like at the precipice. This is like kind of at the, this is at the time, this is like this precipice. This is like this very, like in 1990, it was still considered, in the 1990s, it's still considered very, it's still at the very least acceptable to be a Christian.
Right.
Like, you're not necessarily in commonplace. In commonplace America, not in academia, but in commonplace America, if you say that you're a Christian, people respect that. People think that, oh, this means this person is going to be a person of character or something like that. But this compare and contrast of religion versus secularism, and it almost it pits these two against each other in tension, and then the story really leaves you hanging as to, like, who's right. Because on the ethical level, it's like, okay, religion is clearly right. On a scientific level, there's this there's allusions to, it's not outright, but there's allusions to this fact that matter of fact, I think that the science part does the same thing, because the doctor, let me tell you about my son. You get the head of the NASA place where he goes, where the detective asks him, what happens if a person exceeds your expectations? We have not evaluated them properly. There's two or three different times where there's these allusions to like, we haven't quite figured this thing out yet, kind of a deal. So yeah, I think retrospectively, and for us now, I think it's even more relevant nowadays, because nowadays we can actually, it's more in your face, this tension between secularism and us in the sacred. The tension is more in your face, and people are apostatizing all the time, and making YouTube videos and writing books and all type of stuff about questioning these things. So yeah, I think today it's much more of a it's much more powerful today than it was when it was originally written. When it was originally written, it was heady, little ivory tower. Now it's like, oh wow, it's so relevant.
Yeah, you're totally right. And I could see how back in the day this must have gone over a lot of people's heads. And just like you said earlier, where this film didn't gain a lot of momentum or notoriety until after it hit DVD, or VHS at the time. Another film that was like that was actually The Shawshank Redemption. That film, when it first came out, it's not like it made blockbuster numbers, but the second that people were getting more access to it, maybe through VHS and watching it and sitting down and watching it, it became extremely popular. And I see why a film like this may have been. I think but here's the thing. I've probably watched hundreds of thousands of films, and this film did something different. It kind of shied away from maybe all the action pack, because if it came out around, what was it? What around what year did it come out?
In 97 is when it came out.
So in the 90s, this is like the big action, Arnold Schwarzenegger, all
Right.
those big action movies, and this is a complete different kind of film. Again, I would advise that anybody watch it. Michelle Turner, she said, I meant to watch this movie last night and I fell asleep. It's okay. We'll let it slide. We'll let it slide. But yeah, it was such a dope film. But there was a couple of things in there that caught my attention. I'm pretty sure you know this movie backwards and forwards way better than me. I've only watched it once. I do plan on giving it a second and third viewing just to get some more details. But one of the things that caught my attention when he says, why did my mother put her faith in God's hands
And God.
rather
Yes.
than genetics?
Genetics.
So when you heard that quote, what were some of your thoughts and what did you think about it?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, of course that quote stood out to me because he mentioned God.
Yeah.
And so yeah, that always gets my ears perked up when someone has some commentary on the creator of the universe. It almost I mean, like there was this deep sense of compassion for Vincent, because Vincent is like, his dad didn't think he was enough. His view of himself was, my dad didn't think enough of me to give me his name.
Wow.
He gave it to my brother, and so there's this sense of empathy for him. There's this sense of there's this, as the story continues, as a kid, he's already aware of becoming this kind of second class citizen or person in the world. He's already aware of that, and he's thinking like, I need my brother's blood, and he wants to do this little blood pact oath, but he's like, and now I know I couldn't have never got enough of his blood from that little blood oath. And then you also see in his brother, like even as a kid, as he's growing, his brother has this growing arrogance and hardness to him. And it's not as though I think he hated his brother, Vincent. It's that he looked down on his brother. Like he had already started drinking the Kool-Aid as a kid. Because we're getting this line comes as a flashback, because Vincent is is attempting to circumvent the system as bigotry and has become kind of the norm, where they are kind of beginning. This is like the beginning phases in the story. In this flashback, they have begun to oppress genetically naturally born people by having preferences for the genetically born people, and it's kind of accepted in their society that this is okay, even though it's illegal. He specifically mentions it's technically illegal for them to do it, but they find ways around the system because you shake a person's hand, you drink water from a cup, you touch the doorknob, you leave your matter all over the place, and he's like, they can always figure it out. So he's telling you this while he's trying to get into like the equivalent of NASA, and he's like done all of these things. Like it's implied that while he's telling this part of the story, that he didn't lick the envelope, because he's like, they can get it from licking the envelope, and it wasn't until the guy wanted him to take the urine test that he just turns around and backs out of the room. Right. So apparently everything that he's telling us up into at this point in the flashback, he had thought about it, recognized that this was a potential, and had took steps to prevent this from knocking him out. And then he gets to the one thing that he can't get around, which is the drug test. So yeah, I think this notion of taking it back to the question about trusting God, like there was this sense of empathy for me, because it's like, wow, I'm ancient context in Detroit, because I recognize that context matters, that the world that we live in and the experience that we have in that world contributes to the decisions that we make. And I think his frustration with his mom and dad for going about things the way that they did was every bit as much related to the practical implications and experience that he was having in light of it, and not necessarily just this notion that, he didn't believe in God. It was just
Right.
like, wow, like that one decision to to be born in the Riviera and the Detroit variety turned into me this cruel experience in this world that I'm living in. So yeah, I think that I had sympathy for him, because I didn't really feel like this was a proper assessment of God. This was really a person that was hurting and struggling and feeling the pain in the world and speaking from that pain.
I'm glad you said that because that's very insightful, and I want the audience to kind of hear and pay attention to that. When we're dealing with, like for example, me and apologists in Detroit are Christians, so we believe in God, we believe in the scriptures, we believe they're holy, we believe they're perfect, right? And conveying what the Lord wants to convey to His people and to humanity, so that they know and they can come find salvation in Him. But there are people in the world who don't have that experience, right? Who are actually trying to discover what life is all about just by interacting with the world, right? They're looking at their experiences, they're looking at maybe some of their family members, their friends, and just like he talked about earlier, when he said, "Why did my mother put her faith in God's hands rather than genetics?" Those are honest questions, right? Like it's not like he's trying to be facetious. It's not like he's just trying to be mean and just blaspheme God, but he's really confused, right? It's not like he was raised in a Christian household to believe in God, right? So he has this idea. Well, at least I believe the mother did, but they didn't get too into detail with that. But the whole thing that I found extremely interesting about that was when it went from that, it made this turn, and this turn that I thought was very important was about the 30.2 years of life expectancy,
Life expectancy.
right? And so, of course, the immediate question is, well, would I want to know? How long
Right.
what's my projected life expectation? And then if I do have that life expectation, how would I live? You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, what would I do? Right? We have some individuals who believe that your life has been predestined to just do this, right? And so that changes how you behave. And I thought it was so interesting that this film touched on that aspect of, okay, I'm going to tell you what you or how long you're going to live. And I'm going to tell you what your value is based on that, right? And
Mhm.
so this is where we get into things like, let me get it, genoism, right?
Yeah.
The discrimination on the basis of a genetic profile. And similar to what you were sharing earlier about how you felt discriminated against based on the color of your skin, genoism is just a slick way of kind of just talking about that subject through the area of genetics. And so for me, when I saw that, I thought about not only him, but also how fear pushed his parents to genetics, right? Because they saw
Mhm.
that, oh, if you have, he's not going to live, he's not that, blah blah blah. So all these doubts are placed into their mind, and it pushes them to say, well, let's take things into our own hands and let's try to fix it. Let's try to make that straight, that crooked path straight.
Straight.
So that conversation they have with a doctor, and it's very much because I work in the healthcare field. So those conversations, the way he was talking, it was like, well, wouldn't you want to fix it? Wouldn't you want to give him the best chance possible? You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And all of those things, of course, right? Like the answer is an obvious yes. Like, of course I want to do that. Of course I want to give my child the best chance. But do you want to go fiddling around with genetics, something that you don't even have the faintest concept of the detailed structure? Oh, also, just as a tidbit of information, when I saw Gattaca, I was trying to figure out, yeah, where did Gattaca come from? And then the Uma Thurman's looking
The
at the
gene.
genetics. Just,
Yeah.
I was like, oh, that's how they got
Yeah.
it. I said, that's dope. But tell me a
Yeah.
little bit about like when, let me just make sure. Okay, so fear
Oh,
pushing his
before you ask
parent.
that question, I got a couple comments based on something.
All right, go
Okay,
for it. Go
two
for it.
things. Okay, the doctor was Blair Underwood.
That's
If
right.
you
Yes.
if you looked closely, not the nurse when Vincent was born, who's reading off all of these details, and she's like heart failure,
Mm-hmm.
99% chance, and life expectancy 32 years. The other nurse was Maya Rudolph
Oh, really?
from Saturday Night Live. Yes,
What?
and then you got it was a bunch of people in here. It was Ernest Borgnine. He was the supervisor for when they were cleaning at Gattaca,
Oh my
at
goodness.
the space station. My goodness, man. Dean Norris, Gabby Reese, the volleyball player. She was the girl at Gattaca when they were on the treadmills. They were saying, "Okay,
Oh,
you can get off." I was like, this movie was like star studded, just loaded with great actors and talented creative people
Mm-hmm.
from its time. And it was just like amazing the number of people. Like if you go and actually look at the cast and see who all is in it, you're just like, man, Alan Arkin. I mean, like the leads were great. This was the movie that put Jude Law on the map. This was
Oh
before
yeah.
the incredibly talented Mr. Ripley.
Mm-hmm.
He likely got that because this movie kind of showed that this guy, he had acting chops. Uma Thurman, her as an actress, going from a model to becoming an actress. So yeah, this was the starts of the cast. Another thing that jumped out to me is when you were talking about this, how their experience with Vincent drove them to the geneticist in the second place. And even when they're sitting there talking to him, and they're like, "Should we leave anything up?" And he's like, "No, you want to eliminate as much as you can." If you actually, when he's doing that flashback, Vincent mentions like he knew he was fragile, and like his whole life, like he was overcoming his own self-doubts and anxieties because his whole life being raised from his earliest memories was how fragile he was.
Mm-hmm.
His parents were always worried and treating him with white gloves and preventing him from doing things because they didn't want him to hurt himself and to prematurely die. And that played into who he became as an adult. And he had to literally overcome that anxiety. He really had to snap and say, I'm not going to let this ruin my life, to get to the point to where he's like, I'm gonna take my shot. I'm gonna do what I can do and do the ultimate, pull the ultimate ruse with the borrowed ladder and pursue my dream. So yeah, those are a couple things that stood out to me where you were talking about those points about the. I thought like, wow, star-studded cast because there were so many people in this movie. And then secondly, yeah, it's like again the great storytelling, because not only does he kind of allude to it in the dialogue, visually you're seeing these things play out as he's doing this flashback and in these little settings as they're all, it's revealing the decisions that they're making in light of their experience with Vincent's birth.
Yeah, man. And I'm glad you mentioned that because I did notice Blair Underwood. I was like, oh, everybody has the moments like, oh, I know that person, right? So seeing him was really cool, but I didn't see the others. I'm gonna go back when I watch it the second time. I'll be sure to like pause on certain scenes and just kind of see. But there's a couple of things in the film that I know everybody's waiting for us to talk about because I have a couple of the things, and so let me tell you how I kind of see the film, just as a broad spectrum, just looking from the outside in. I look at this film as this man, Vincent, kind of coming to the conclusion that nobody could pretty much isolate me and keep me from pursuing my dreams, right? And one of the things that they said in the film that kind of resonated with me was they have discrimination down to a science. That was a dope quote. They have it down to a science, and that seems to me like something that the world would do, right? That's what makes this movie so great, is that this can actually happen. Like you can see this happening, and in many degrees it has happened. Actually, let me I'm going to read the definition of eugenics, and then I want to get your thoughts on it.
Like, look, we both took some of the same notes. Oh, you can't see it, it's reflection.
Oh, no,
but I took the same quote. Now, I belong to a new social class, no longer determined by your social status or the color of your skin. No, we now have discrimination down to a science.
Down to a science. All right, so here's the definition of eugenics if anybody's interested. Eugenics is the selection of desired heritable characteristics in order to improve future generations, typically in reference to humans. The term eugenics was coined in the 1880s. It failed as a science in the first half of the 20th century, particularly after Nazi Germany used eugenics to support the extermination of those it considered socially inferior. Now, this film didn't go into that extreme, but it did reduce certain individuals to certain job titles. Like, oh, you're not expected to live, so let's just make you a grunt and you just do like the laborious work. You're not really worthy of doing something. And can you imagine how many of these individuals would have been great had they been given the opportunity and not been raised in a world where they were already categorized to only play in this part of the playground, in a sense. And, when I think about all that, I'm like, man, do people do that even in the body of Christ? where we just say, okay, that person, he can't be a public speaker because he's too awkward looking, or or this
Mhm.
person can't possibly be a good counselor because they're too intimidating looking. Like, there are all these things that we can actually behave in the same way as this whole film. And for me, I wanted to bring that out to people, is you can't judge a book by its cover, of course, but you can't even judge a book by its pages to some degree until you get down into the nitty gritty of the details. This film does it through genetics, of course, but it does keep people from actually pursuing something that's very important to them. And this film actually demonstrates that in a perfect manner. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah. My first thought is I just want to make a general comment. This is just me.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It's low hanging fruit to actually turn to Nazi Germany to talk about eugenics.
Mm-hmm.
The reality is the entire world at the time, more or less, had embraced this notion of eugenics. It flowed out of Charles Darwin's two books. What was the goodness gracious? Why am I drawing a blank? What is this? It was the Theory of Evolution, the
Oh
something of
yeah, I'll
preferred
I'll find the title
races.
for you. I know exactly what
Yeah,
you're doing,
something
but
of
go
preferred
ahead.
races. The subtitle was the first one, and then the Descent of Man. His second book was the Descent of Man. The Descent of Man, in particular, is like this. Is like this small snowball at the top of the mountain that rolls downhill and turns fully into eugenics becoming this thing where people are where societies are actively throwing money at, and scientists, because this is on the heels of the enlightenment and science becoming this very prominent thing in the world as well. So yeah, hold on one second. My dog is at the door trying to go out.
Oh no, you're fine.
Give
You're
me one
fine.
second. Look at it.
No worries. So yeah, I don't know if you guys have watched this film or not. I highly suggest it. Let me talk to some of the people in the chat while he's getting that handled.
All right, I'm back. So
Yeah.
yeah, you
Well,
get
there you
that.
go.
So
What's up, everybody? Go
my
ahead.
my point was going to be that I think that it's easy to talk about Germany, but America practiced eugenics too.
Hmm.
Matter of fact, the Supreme Court just overturned the case where the most prominent eugenics organization in our country. They just overturned this law that said that this ruling that said that people have a right to this and no longer have a right to it, and now you have to litigate these things on the level of the state. But that's eugenics here. That's us
Right.
deciding who's. If you go back and you listen to the commentary, it's not even hidden. It's right in front of you. They were a eugenics organization. They were trying to extract the lesser genes out of the gene pool here in America, and that turned into population control, maybe, or something like that. But at the end of the day, America practiced eugenics, and if you count the number of lives lost through the American eugenics practices, it's up there. 60 million. That's a lot of people.
Yeah.
That's a lot of people. So yeah, I just not that Germany doesn't deserve its reputation, but I hate the fact that we don't see the beam in our own eye. We look at the mote in others. And I say, if we're going to talk about eugenics, let's talk about eugenics to the eugenics that we practice, and use that as an illustration.
Yeah.
So that's one. What was the question? Because that was on my mind as soon as you said
I forgot.
eugenics.
To be complete, I forgot the question. But I know I was talking to some degree about, of course, I gave the definition of eugenics. I talked about how in the church, there we go. In the church, we can actually find sometimes we can have this idea, well, the practice of discrimination based on outward appearance, or maybe somebody doesn't look as what we might deem as physically attractive, so he shouldn't be the pastor, or that's what I'm talking about. Like, have you seen that kind of thing happen in life, or is that something that I've just witnessed myself, where people are just being chosen based on a certain base characteristics in order to be a certain thing or whatever?
Well, I mean, yeah, of course, with our history of racism, I mean, that's it. But I'm saying if we're getting beyond that, I think that eugenics is at this point has wound down for the most part.
Hmm.
There's still plenty of scientists, there's biologists out there, that are, sorting through exploring the implications of the human genome now that it's been completely mapped out. And there's people out there working on cloning and all types of things. So like we still practice it, but not in the same ways. You know what I'm saying? So and not as prominently or as prevalently as it has in the past. Where I see our society having something very similar is through caste. I was looking for my book here by Isabella Wilkerson, Caste, and because and this is a book about the history of caste systems in the world and an argument. This is her an argument. I think she's a journalist, Isabella Wilkerson. She was a journalist for the New York Times and eventually became an author of a couple of popular books, The New Jim Crow. Or no, she's the Warmth of this other book over here. But anyway, I think that's really where we kind of have our own problem today. We have a just like they had a de facto, that means unofficial, de facto system of prejudice to where people who were born biologically natural were discriminated against versus people who were genetically altered, born through genetic altering. What we have is just think about it. Who are some of the most richest and powerful people in the world? It's LeBron James didn't go to college, y'all. He's a billionaire. You know what I'm saying? Jay-Z didn't go to college. He's a billionaire. Mark Zuckerberg dropped out of college. Didn't Bill Gates drop out of college? I think he dropped out of college too when they created Microsoft.
Yeah,
I think so. I think it was either him or the guy that did Apple.
But before you continue, really quickly, because you brought up the caste system, and I want to make sure the audience is informed on what that is. I got a basic definition for everybody. So a caste system is a class structure that is determined by birth. Loosely, it means that in some societies, the opportunities you have access to depend on the family you happened to be born into. And that's just a general definition. It gets a lot deeper, but that's just something, just so the audience knows when you bring out the book Caste. Yeah.
And here's a story in the Bible, real quick. So remember in the book of Acts where Paul goes to Jerusalem and they think that he had brought some Greeks into the temple. And so there's this uprising, and then the police, the Roman soldiers come. And then the guy who's in charge, the police chief guy who's there at that sergeant is there, says, grab him, go over there and beat him. And then he tells the soldier that's about to beat him, he says, you're going to beat me, a Roman citizen, without even being convicted. And so he goes, whoa, he goes back and tell the sergeant, hey, that guy's a Roman citizen, because they got a caste system. And in the caste system, if you're not a Roman citizen, they can beat you.
Right.
You don't have
Isn't that crazy?
Convicted. Isn't that crazy? They
Yeah.
can do whatever they want to do to you. But because Paul's a Roman citizen, he goes, whoa, wait a minute. He comes to Paul and he's like, well, how much did you pay for your citizenship? I paid a ton of money for mine. And Paul said, I was born a citizen. Wow. And there was another story where when Paul was in Ephesus and and the silversmith got mad and they took him and beat him. And then they put him in jail, and they wanted Paul to go away. He's like, you're not going to beat me, and I'm a Roman citizen. And the guys had to come out and deal with the shame of doing that and ask Paul to leave instead of forcing him to leave. So yeah. Anyway, getting back to our caste used to be, and still to a certain degree is, if you don't have a college degree, you are not qualified to do this type of a job. Right. You're only qualified to do like blue collar jobs. And I'll tell you how you see it. Almost everywhere I go in this country, I travel a little bit, for leisure and for work. I travel a little bit, and always have over the last 30 years. Almost everywhere I go, I see Hispanics and African Americans and airports as concierges in hotels, as the maids at the hotels, at the workers at the McDonald's and all the fast food chains. And almost everywhere I go, if they're the higher up the hierarchy that you get in any of these places, and then in everywhere in the professional world, you see the majority culture as the majority people in those positions. So it's like, well, why is it? Well, they'll tell you it's because you don't have this degree, but this degree is an arbitrary thing. There's like 30, 40 years ago, nobody cared if you had a degree. You're more likely to get a job because of a referral, because your friend said, hey, I got a friend. And I
Mm-hmm.
can't tell you how many people I know that was like, yeah, I never went to school. I just say my friend got me into this job and I did well. By the end of my career, I was making good money, owned 2 houses, and I
Right.
did well for myself. So yeah, we have a de facto caste system today when it comes to education. Many people in our society are oppressed and suppressed because they claim that you don't have this degree, which you don't have to have. It's arbitrary. Any company has the right to set and regulate how they're going to standardize their hiring practices.
Right.
And they can just as easily say experience is what we're looking for. Knowledge and experience. And if you can show us that you have the knowledge and experience, then you're hired. No, they say bachelor's degree is required.
Right.
And so yeah, we have our own issue that's of something that's very analogous to this genetic thing that this story is being told with here today. And just like in their world, no one seemed to notice it. I think the same thing is true in our world. No one seems to notice it. It's like it's the air we breathe. It's the water we're swimming in. No one seems to notice that people are literally being held back arbitrarily on this thing that we have that some in our society has culturally decided to standardize as a means of evaluating people, determining your value and your capabilities and capacities. So yeah, we have our own issues today that is very similar to it. And I was experiencing some of that again 20 years ago when this movie came out, 30 years ago, 25 years ago, when this movie came out, I was experiencing that. I was a very dutiful and diligent worker. I like everyone loved me. I had a great reputation, but somehow, some way, when opportunities for advancement came along, I was overlooked.
Right.
It was always anybody but me. And a few times it was people that were like clearly had like huge red flags issues, like smell like alcohol every day when they come in, or got caught sleeping on the job. And it's like, but somehow, some way, that person's more qualified than me. I don't know why.
Man, that's sad, and I've seen that happen. I mean, even throughout my life. But there was something I wanted to say. I'm trying to figure out what it was. But do you think that happens in churches as far as when it comes to pastors or individuals being chosen as pastors, teachers, and leaders, where it's not, and I'm not saying every church. I'm just saying just in general and very general, as far as let's just say there are a good amount of candidates and there's somebody who's very qualified to be a pastor, but they look over that person in preference to a friend or in preference to a type of leader they're looking for versus somebody who's extremely qualified. Because I definitely want to, of course, we're talking about Gattaca, we're talking about the film, but I want to bring this back to Christ Christianity because I want pastors to make sure that they're not falling to this kind of idea and thinking where, oh, he has to be, the sharpest dressed, or he has to be this, or he has to be very, very, what's the word I'm looking for? He has to fit the ideal or what society wants a pastor to look like. Have you experienced seeing that maybe personally or, witnessed that at all?
Yeah, I saw it a long time ago. I see it. It's hard for me to determine how prevalent it is today because most of my experience comes predominantly through the church that I've been a member of for the last 20 years. Although I do kind of, I work with a lot of other churches. I don't feel like my sampling is adequate enough for me to truly kind of give a judgment onto how things generally might be in these other places. That said, 25 years ago, 26 years ago, when I was a member of a church, there was a peer of mine was the nephew of the pastor. When I would preach, I would get asked to preach. And basically it's like, hey, and it's like a lot of people want to preach. I felt called to preach, but I didn't feel this need to preach. So I didn't feel like this is how I get I didn't feel like, like I needed to preach. I felt like, hey, could you close that door for me, Monique? I felt like when opportunity comes, it comes. But my pastor was like, oh, I think he was attempting to develop my preaching abilities. So, and the only way you do that is by actually preaching. So he would like regularly ask me to preach. He would also regularly ask his nephew to preach, who was maybe a couple years younger than me. Whenever his nephew preached, he raised an offering. Whenever I preached, he said, "Thank you." And so like there was certainly this difference in treatment between, his biological blood family and me, which I noted. There was also a lot of cronyism back then. Again, I've always been this very and this is like let me say, like Paul, allow me to boast for a minute, like I'm a fool, y'all. Like I'm a fool. I've always been this very humble, noble, dutiful person. I clean toilets. Like there is nothing that is beneath me. There's nothing that I won't do to serve my community, to make everything easier for all of us. So for me, when I had spare time, I was at my church. And when I'm at my church, if something needed to be done, I was doing it. And I wasn't getting paid to be a janitor. I was just doing it because I was there and it was something that needed to be done. And so I was doing it. So to me, if there was a reason for him to have a desire to be gracious toward me, I felt like, wow, there was plenty of reason for him to have to. I mean, I was laying tile. I was doing all type of stuff at this church. Like I was a very active and contributing member. But in spite of all of that, there was a lot of cronyism. There was other people in the churches that he would stroke, or he would do certain things for instead of me. And if anything, I felt like I would be neglected. And again, it didn't bother me at the time. I really didn't care because I wasn't doing any of this stuff for any recognition or anything like that. But it was certainly noted, like when treatment isn't fair. It was just like, wow, what's up with that? So yeah, I certainly experienced it, and I saw it in other places as well. Because even back then, my pastor was a bishop. He engaged and interacted with lots of other pastors. And so I would see how they interacted with one another, how they backbite one another when they're not around, and all of this crazy stuff. So yeah, I saw it quite a bit back 25 years ago in this other church I was a member of. In the church I'm in today, I won't say that I don't see it a lot. I will say this. Okay. Like I made it very clear when I got to this church 20 something years ago, that I had an ambition to be a leader. I'm like, hey, everywhere I've gone, I've always been supervisor, manager. I've always been, if there's some social club, somehow, some way I get elected in leadership, it's just natural. And so I saw myself as having sort of a gift of it. So when I got there, I told him that. And so I've been there for 25, 26 years, and I'm not an elder. And like, there was a time when that really bothered me. There was a time where that really, like, I felt like the same thing. It's like, wow, I'm here, I'm contributing a lot more than some of the other guys that are getting consideration. I've been here longer. There were some guys that I had been there longer than, or at least as long as. So there was a period of time at my current church that I kind of felt like, wow, some kind of way that I was maybe being overlooked. In retrospect, there were reasons that I won't get into right now, that I felt like were justifiable enough for me to feel like, okay, I misread that kind of a situation. Like, yeah, I still might not agree with you, might not agree with them. And I might've felt like, well, y'all should have came to me and talked to me instead of just, assuming and acting off of your assumptions. But in retrospect, like, yeah, I get it. We all human, and this type of a thing is a reasonable enough thing for one to decide that you're not. So, and now it's like, if it happens, it happens. I would certainly welcome it, because again, I feel like I'm naturally a leader, and as a very passionate person about the congregation that I'm a member of, I certainly would love to contribute and help guide and shape how we are practicing reflecting, even though I feel like I'm doing it already from this kind of de facto leadership, position. I feel like I'm doing it already, but I would love to be able to do it from a more formal position, formal place where it's recognized within the community, versus people just, recognize that I do these things, but, not really coming with the full benefit of the authority that should come with it. So.
Well, first, I want to thank you for even sharing that, because I think that what you shared was a wealth of information that I think leaders and pastors should really pay attention to. Pay attention to the individuals doing the work. Pay attention to the individuals and give some focus. Don't look for a certain. I mean, you have to have some standard, right? They need to be able to communicate clearly because that's important. You want somebody who can communicate clearly, but be aware of how individuals are selected and make sure it's on a biblical basis based on not only the way they can communicate, but also the content of their character. Because you have some people who are very great communicators and the content of their character is horrible, but they get away with it because they can communicate so clearly, or they can rile up a crowd, or they can get people really amped and excited, but they have no biblical characteristics that would reflect Christ very well. They're not consistent with their theology or with what the Word of God says. So just a warning out there to pastors, just be careful with the individuals you select, because the people that you select are responsible for either pushing people away from Christ or pushing people toward Christ. And, it's on a knife's edge more than anything else. But there's something I want to talk about in the film, and I see this grand scheme of making it to the kingdom of heaven. This is my idea, right? Yeah, we had this guy. He was trying to work and earn his way to the heavens in a sense, right? He's trying to get to space. But one thing that I noticed was, if you're looking for any flaw in yourself, right? And I'm making sure I read this right. Looking for any flaw becomes all that you see. And I noticed that in the film, and us as Christians, we're not earning salvation. We're not earning anything. But sometimes the thing that we struggle with, we tend to think that that's going to be the very thing that we're defined by, right? Because we all have a struggle, right? Some people struggle with it publicly, some people privately, right? Some people struggle, and some people take their struggle and they amplify it so much that they become very stagnant, or they never move forward, or they can't have that right relationship with God because they're so focused on their flaw. Now, I'm not saying not to focus on your flaw at all, because we are all, by God's grace, supposed to change over time. But what I am saying is what in 1 John 2:1, right? Dear children, do not sin. But if you do sin, you have an advocate with Jesus Christ. You know what I mean? So it's this safety and the security in Christ. Now, this is something I had to learn, because I came from a works-based salvation group where I had to earn God's love. I had to earn salvation. And so that was one of the biggest things. When I read that verse and I actually thought about it, I was like, wait a minute. He's saying don't sin. And that's a good thing. We should not sin. He says, but if you do, like, whoa, but if you do, that means there's an anticipation that you will fall at some point. And he doesn't want you to lose heart. And remember that Jesus Christ is your advocate. He's the one speaking on your behalf based on what he completed. So it's extremely encouraging. So when I saw this in the film and I saw that, he was struggling with every little flaw that he had, even to the point where he was changing himself physically, right? And one of the things I noticed was, of course, the height operation, I call it,
Yeah.
right? And that thing actually happens. Like, there are individuals who actually, I was like, whoa, this was in the film back then?
I know someone who had it.
Oh, do you?
Yeah, I do.
Oh, wow.
I know someone who had it, yeah.
Oh, okay. So now, did they explain to you what that experience was like in any way?
Oh, it was like I was there for it. It was painful.
Yeah.
And this was like for medical reasons. This wasn't simply for cosmetic reasons. This was for medical.
He just
reasons.
didn't want to be just 6'1" just for the sake of being 6'1"
No,
and taller.
this was actually one leg was shorter than the other one.
See, that makes sense. Yeah.
It was going to cause some other medical issues long term. And so their family made the decision to go ahead and fix it. And so that's what they did. They broke his leg. They stuck this clicker thing in his leg so that every so often as along the way, the bone will naturally heal itself.
Right.
So as the bone is healing, right, you have to re-break it with this clicker thing that they put in there until it gets to the length that you need it to be. Right. So basically they got this little thing on your body. They open you up, break it, stick the thing in there, let it start healing. And then you keep going to these doctor's appointments and they keep cranking it and re-breaking it and stretching it until it gets to the right length. When it gets to the right length, they leave it, and the bone grows, and all the tissue, muscles, and everything else just grows around it like normal, and you're 2 inches taller.
Right. But
Yes, I know somebody who's gone through it.
that's and this happens to be your movie. I mean, this and you know somebody who went through it. Like this is definitely your film, dude. But so I pulled up a list of quotes.
But hold on before you go there, because the last thing you were talking about, like I felt like halfway through the movie, subtly there was this shift in from this legalism to this revelation that in Christ alone kind of revelation, analogous to that. Okay, so this is when they find his eyelash and they plaster pictures of his face all over the place. Right. And he comes home and he starts grabbing stuff out of the refrigerator and throwing it in the trash. And Jerome's like, "What are you doing?" And he's like, "It's over, Jerome." He was like, "What are you talking about?" And he was like, "They found an eyelash and they've got pictures of my face all over the place." And he's like, "Don't you get it? They don't see you. When they look at you, they see me."
Yeah.
And it was like, wow, that's exactly how it is with Christ.
Right.
Like they didn't.
Very
like,
good
here's
point.
This guy.
Very
there's
good
pictures
point.
of his face all over this place. And he goes to work every single day. And his own biological brother is there. But because the culture, they don't even look at you. There's another quote, and this is a real short one. It says, it was something about the blood. It said blood has no nationality as long as it's got what you're looking for. It's the only passport you need. That's what Jerome tells. Vincent.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like he's right. He's like, dude, your own brother has walked past you at work, because the brother was one of the detectives that was investigating the case, and he's walked past you every day during this investigation and doesn't even notice that it's you, because they're so arrogant. They don't even look at your face. They just look at your genetics. As long as you press that little machine with your blood DNA in it when you walk into work, and boom, you're valid. You just walk on in. And they don't even consider. And it's also odd that they call them valids and invalids, even though it's illegal to discriminate. They call them valids.
Isn't that crazy? Nate said, "You've got to vacuum those keyboards." Yeah, that was a pretty cool scene of how. Yeah. And this is, and you know what? Let's use that as a storytelling point, because this film did really good at that. A lot of the time, especially nowadays, film feels the need to keep things in constant motion to keep people's attention. This film didn't do that. It held the camera frame and stood still, right? And let the scene just sit. And that's so important, because that's how you stoke the imagination of the individuals who are watching the film. You know, it's kind of like remember we talked about Batman when it came out, and how the dark. Well, anyway, they were talking. It was basically the opening dialogue of Batman. And he was talking about how he puts fear in the hearts of criminals, and the shadow was just there, and the guys were just looking, and the camera just stood there looking at darkness, right? To give you the perspective of the criminal looking into the darkness. And you start to think like, is he going to come out? Is he not going to come out? And that's exactly what the director wanted you to do. He wanted you to be afraid of the dark. And so he held the camera there. This film did that in multiple points where it would just hold the frame. And I love it when a film does that. But I got to talk about, I think Benjamin mentioned it earlier, but I had it saved up, and we're going to talk about the swim back, right?
Because, that's
dude.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. The original when he left, or the one at the end with his brother? That whole dialogue at the end where his brother's like, "If you let me help you, I can get you out of here." It's like, do you know how much work it was for me to get out of here?
Yeah.
I don't need your help. He just burns you that I don't need your help, doesn't it?
But the one that I'm talking about is the one where he says, he asks him, how'd you do it? And it's like,
how are you doing this, Vincent?
I never saved anything for the swim back. Here's what I thought. This was my immediate thought when I heard that line. I thought, that's how we're supposed to live for God.
Yeah.
That's how we're supposed to live for God, and going to the kingdom and being in the kingdom of heaven with the Lord is like, okay, use your life and empty the tank. right? Because let's be honest, when we're renewed, we're not going to be like, oh man, I wish I would have held back a little bit.
Right.
It's like, no, while we have this opportunity, spread the gospel. Use your body for the glory of God. Don't save anything as if you're going to live on this in this world that we know right now as if you're coming back. No. We as Christians are supposed to use our faculties, our bodies, our words, our talents, our gifts, and everything, and use it and empty the tank for the Lord, right? Don't save anything for the swim back, because we are destined to become, because in the right predestined, right? We are in Christ, so we are predestined for eternal life in a relationship with God. That's the goal. That's what we're going towards. There's nothing that's going to stop that as long as you are in Christ. And that to me was so beautiful. When Benjamin said it, I'm sorry, Benjamin, I didn't respond immediately because I wanted to save it toward the end, just like the film. But I'm glad that you said it. As a Christian, I don't want to hold anything back. I want to empty my tank, use all of my creativity, use all of the talents and the gifts that God has given me in order to glorify His name. What did you think about that scene? About when he said that to him?
Yeah, I think that and the next line, he said, "I didn't save anything for the swim back," and then his brother's like, "How are you doing this?" He's like, "Come on, we're closer to the other side." He said, "We gotta go back. We gotta go back." And he was like, "We're closer to the other side now."
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I love that. I loved how both that the like those are kind of the bookends of Vincent becoming himself. The first time where he didn't save anything for the swim back, he saved his brother's life. And, there's even a line there: "For the first time in my life, he knew that I was stronger than him. And I found out that I was stronger than I could have ever possibly imagined."
Wow.
He said, I said, this line is so many quotable lines in this movie.
The film is awesome, man.
And then when he gets at this particular scene, when he swims back, his brother has to concede, okay, this, like, you're better than me effectively, even though, in the context of this movie, like the brother, his older brother became an underachiever. His older brother is just a policeman.
Right.
The police, and they're subtly telling you, Alan Arkin's, his partner, his older brother is a genetically altered guy. Alan Arkin is not. But Alan Arkin's character has been a police officer longer. That's why he's constantly calling the younger guy boss and "you're smarter than me" and saying all of these things, kind of feeding his ego.
Right.
But it's making this subtle point. His older brother, who had all the advantages through this genetic altering, effectively failed. Not only him, Uma Thurman's character, even though she was genetically altered, she still had this potential, like 30% risk of this heart issue. So they're like, oh, they're not going to let me go in space. She's like, the only ship is a satellite around the sun, another 365 days around the sun. That's the only place that I'm going. Even though they let her in because she was genetically altered, she was like, they still relegated her to a position where it wasn't. Whereas here's him as a borrowed ladder, as using this other guy's, Jerome's identity, because no one looks at you in the face, they just look at your blood, And here he is exceeding all expectations. Even his brother said, our parents died believing that they had outlived you. I had my doubts. He wasn't quite sure, because the last time he saw his brother was the day that his brother beat him. And afterwards, that was the catalyst for Vincent going in the house, owning up to the fact that, like, I am not a member of this family. I am holding this family back because they don't see me the way that they see my brother. So he tears his face off of the family picture, takes his suitcase and walks out and leaves and say, I'm going to let y'all be the family that y'all clearly are. I'm an outsider. I'm going to pursue my dreams, and you guys aren't going to support me in that. So I'm just going to go and pursue my dreams. So yeah, I that was a great scene. Him at that end where he tells you, this is how I did it. I went all in. I pushed all the chips to the middle of the table, and whatever's going to happen is going to happen. I gave it my best effort. That's what I did.
Yeah.
I didn't save anything for the trip back. And as you point out, this is a great analogy for how we should live as Christians. Don't save anything for the trip back. Don't spend your life wishing and pondering what coulda, woulda, shoulda been under other circumstances. Recognize that the decision that you made is the greatest decision that you could have ever made. You have placed yourself in the service of the King. You have entered into citizenship into the kingdom of God, and that position far exceeds, eyes have not seen, ears have not heard, neither has it entered into the heart of man, the things that God has in store for us. Know that you've made a great decision, and there's nothing to look back for. Don't save anything for the trip. Just keep going forward. Give it y'all.
Amen. Amen. So there's a couple of quotes I'm going to read, but I'm going to save one quote for the very end because I want us to end on that. So here we go. So he said, "From an early age, I came to think of myself as others thought of me, chronically ill. Every skinned knee and runny nose was treated as if it were life-threatening."
Yeah.
Dude, when he said that, the first thing I thought about was when an individual, let's say, falls short, right, in some way, they start looking at every little thing that they do, and it becomes so... you can magnify something to the point where it's a lot larger than it actually is. And that can happen in the relationships with parents and their children, right? They can over amplify a mistake a kid made, and now that kid becomes so self-critical that he becomes paralyzed in any effort to do anything because he's so scared to make a mistake or to fall short. That's one thing I know I struggled with when I was part of the cult I used to be a part of. Was I didn't want to mess up, and I was so afraid of messing up that I messed up. And it's like you're thinking, like, how does that make any sense? But again, hyper focusing on things can really cause you to really just become stagnant in your walk with Christ. Yes, you're going to make mistakes. You're going to fall short, right? But you can't let those mistakes and that falling short keep you from pursuing Christ. Cannot keep you from helping your neighbor. You know what I mean? Or being a good reflection or an image bearer of God. Because even though you have, like, for example, if you had a mirror, right? And it's just coming to me in my head, but if you had a mirror that had a very, very perfectly clean glass, but there were still cracks and there were etches around the edge of the glass, guess what? It still shows a perfect reflection, right? You're still a mirror. You're still an image bearer of God. So you have these imperfections in your life, just like a cracked frame of a mirror. But because Christ is granted you or gave you that perfect glass to reflect him because of his righteousness, even with those imperfections around the frame, you can still reflect Christ perfectly, right? You can still show who he is to the world. And so I just want to encourage people out there, because I know that that's a struggle for many people. It was a struggle for me. And to some extent, I still have those little thoughts in my head that happen as a result of what I call the debris of my old life. And I just want people to know, like, listen, you're going to have those struggles. You're going to find yourself, over criticizing every little thing that you do. But what I want you to focus on more is, how can I reflect Christ better? That's it. Just keep taking those small steps. Keep taking those small steps and just walking toward Christ. You're going to stumble. You're going to fall. As long as you are still moving forward toward Christ, you're okay, right? Because he got you. And I think a lot of the time, individuals who are so focused on earning salvation and earning God's love, it's just heartbreaking, because I know the mental state it can put a person in. I was in that mental state. And so I just want to encourage people out there that, listen, if you keep looking for flaws, you're going to find them. And as a Christian, you're going to find them even more. And they're going to become even more magnified, because you're becoming more familiar with God's character and what he requires for absolute perfection, which is why we needed Jesus in the first place. And so just want to put that out there. Any thoughts on that idea or even that quote? If you need me to read it again, I can.
No. I remember, because I referenced it earlier myself. And what being put this noted that Jerome tried to commit suicide. That's how he ended up in a wheelchair.
Right.
Because he said, because early on in the relationship between Vincent and Jerome, and the point that I'm making right now is that both ends of the spectrum, Vincent in this sense of buying into the notion of his inadequacy because of how his parents treated every skin knee and every bump and bruise. Well, Jerome in his as a genetically altered person grew up with this immense sense of arrogance and cockiness to him, and his thing, as you see the scene where Uma steals the little hair out of the drawer and and has it genetically coded and goes, "You're everything and some," right? So Jerome's like this exceptional specimen of the genetically altered people, and yet, as he points out, on my best day, second place. And second place was so hard for him to accept, it drove him into depression. And he went out and jumped in front of a car to try to kill himself, but he couldn't even do that good because he survived. So it happens at both ends of the spectrum. Both this notion of severe anxiety about your adequacy or about your God being willing to accept you with in acknowledgement of all your flaws, as well as God forbid, a sense of arrogance where you have no true sense of your place in the scope of God's economy. Like you're like, go read the book of Job as Yahweh speaks to Job and explains to him like, bruh, you ain't on my level. You can't even comprehend. You don't even know how these simple things work. How can you even begin to imagine what it's like in a day of my life? Stay in your place. Trust me, just stay in your place. So yeah, I think both ends of the spectrum, really is healthy for Christians to consider and reflect and recognize, I'm not God, and that's a good thing because, I can be fickle. God is gracious beyond my comprehension because not only has, I ain't even got to look outside of the mirror. Christ Jesus came to save sinners and I'm the worst of them. I ain't even got to look at nobody else. So yeah, I think that was a great quote. That was a great quote. And it was again, this movie is just it's so rich. It's so many different, it's such rich storytelling.
Yeah.
The human experience is on full display on both ends of the spectrum, and in such a powerful and rich way. It's just, I love this movie. It's one of my favorite movies.
Dude, this has become one of my favorite movies. I was like, Chris did it, man. He gave me a banger, man, because that movie was awesome. And again, if you're just coming into the show right now, earlier in the stream, I said I truly enjoyed this kind of storytelling where it wasn't necessary to do fight scenes, special effects, and I mean there were some special effects, but it was so muted you wouldn't even know it's a special effect, right? It's just one of those, I didn't even know they were in the green screen or whatever it is. But either way, it was so beautiful to see just a good story being told, something to provoke the thoughts and ideas of the heart, and it did a fantastic job. Now, before I read this last quote, I may beat you to it. You probably wanted to read it. We'll see. Is there any last thoughts, any last ideas about this film and your connection to it that maybe you want to share with the audience before we start wrapping up the stream?
Not necessarily specific about this film. What I'll say is this: I love a good, entertaining show. Sometimes I just want to numb out. I just want to sit down, relax, not have to give too much attention to a show. As a matter of fact, there's times where I won't even watch a new show. Like here's a confession: I haven't watched a single episode of The Rings of Power, not one yet. I have not watched one episode yet. I have not. Okay, and I'm a Game of Thrones fan,
right?
I've watched one episode of House of Dragon because
my dad said he loves it. I've never seen it, but yeah, my dad loves it.
Yeah, sometimes I'm so I'm so tense. What I don't want to do is watch a show that I really want to watch and miss a lot of the story, the narrative that's there, and particularly when with big budget big budget stories like both of these two, House of Dragon, and because it's you like if Game of Thrones is any implication, it's very rich storytelling. It's the type of storytelling that you can watch over and over and over again and continue to draw and recognize, wow, how can I miss this? I missed this. I missed this. So yeah, so sometimes I don't have an issue with being entertained. Let's blow stuff up. You know, where's Michael Bay at?
Right, because that's his whole MO.
Right, let's just blow some stuff up. I can do without the skimpy girl. You know, I can do without that part of the Michael Bay movie, but the blow up part, we good. Go ahead and blow some stuff up, right, Michael Bay. That said, that's not my favorite type of movie. That's the only type of movie that I'm interested in when I'm tired and I really don't have the mental energy to be focused and to appreciate the art for it. My preference is rich storytelling that tells these human stories that broadens the scope of our minds and in absorbing the world. It's almost like outrospection.
Right.
You know, introspection is like when you turn inward to reflect on yourself and your place in this world. Outrospection is when you're looking from the outside and seeing how what the outside of the world is doing is actually impacting you. So it's almost like outrospection. A lot of this really good, rich art. So yeah, man, when we watch art, I just want to encourage you guys not to just to seek art that entertains you. Look for art. Appreciate that for what it is and enjoy it when you can. But learn to appreciate good storytelling. Learn to appreciate great acting, like where you don't see an actor. I don't see Ethan Hawke. Right. I don't see Jude Law. I see Vincent and Jerome. That's who I see. You know, I see where not only am I looking at something that's fictional, but I'm actually growing. I'm actually learning and I'm growing and I'm reflecting on, my place in the world in God's plans and story for me. So yeah, I just want to encourage you all to look at art. And in that regard, this is a very, very rich piece of art. It really is. It's a very rich piece of art that is visually beautiful. It's rich and complex and yet simple in the way it tells a story. It's really it's just like a bunch of it's so many one-liners that are just so powerful and provocative.
Oh yeah.
This movie. So yeah, enjoy good art. And here's a great example of some good art. One of my favorite movies that I would encourage you to check out on your own. If you live in the local area, I got it on DVD. It was on Netflix. It just recently dropped off of Netflix, and I haven't been able to find it anywhere free. Fortunately, I have a DVD of it. So if you're interested, hit me up. Come on over. I got popcorn. We'll watch it again. I don't mind watching. I enjoy it that much.
Awesome. Okay, so this is the quote I want to read, and then we'll talk a little bit about it. For someone who was never meant for this world. You knew I was gonna. I must confess.
It's the last quote on my list.
I knew you would have this quote. That's why I was like, hopefully you don't say it. But all right, it says, "For someone who was never meant for this world, I must confess, I'm suddenly having a hard time leaving it. Of course, they say, every atom in our bodies was once part of a star. Maybe I'm not leaving. Maybe I'm going home."
That's right.
Of course. We are not of this world, right? So that's the first thing I think about is when he was sitting there, right? He said, for someone who was never meant for this world. Now, we're talking about the world that we live in now. We weren't meant for this kind of world. We were meant to live in harmony and perfect relationship with God on a perfect world, creating and multiplying and filling the earth and doing these beautiful things. But look at the world that we live in. It's absolutely corrupted. Now, there are certain beauties, right? You could still look at nature and see the subtle hints of beauty of God, right? You can see God in creation. But at the same time, can you imagine how much more beautiful it was when he created it and it was perfect and nothing was degrading, right? There wasn't this state of entropy where everything kept on breaking down like we live in now. And then he says, I must confess, I'm suddenly having a hard time leaving it. Right? It's this crisis of conscience, like, the world is kind of keep pulling me back in, and I'm having a hard time leaving something that I know and I'm familiar with. But now I'm living for a different kind of world. Then he says, of course, they say every atom in our bodies was once part of a star. So basically, God created us, right? Everything about us was created by him. We belong to God. We're here to image bear him. Then he says, well, maybe I'm not leaving. Maybe I'm going home. So in this world, you will have trouble, but take heart, for Jesus Christ has overcome the world. And I just want to encourage you, although it feels like everything is wrapped up in this life, if you put your faith in Christ, you were never meant to live in this kind of world. You're meant for the kingdom of heaven, a new heavens and a new earth, with a new city descending down onto the earth, and God reuniting with mankind again and having that perfect relationship where no longer does our sin separate us from him, but now his son unites us together. Now, those are my thoughts. Chris, I definitely want to hear your thoughts about this quote.
So I'm not sure if you caught it.
Probably,
but
probably not. Go ahead, go for it.
Okay, so Jerome, the genetically altered person representing the secular philosopher, what's his name? Goodness, name at the beginning of the movie. His name is Willard Galen.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a Willard Galen quote. He's still alive today, Willard Galen.
Oh, really? Okay.
He's a clinical psychiatrist and a professor, and he's also like a lay philosopher. So he philosophizes a lot about like the philosophy of emotions and the philosophy of like introspection and things like that. So Vincent represents this tinkering with that Mother Nature is asking for, or this secular approach. Vincent represents God's way. His parents trusted in God. How did Jerome die?
He committed suicide.
Yep. How?
Oh, he put himself in the furnace with his silver medal.
Hell.
Right.
He went to hell. Vincent went to heaven. Vincent left the planet.
I did not think of that.
The God person.
Oh, wow.
The God person left and went to the heavens.
Oh, dude.
The secular.
Now I got to watch the film.
Secular humanist person went to hell. He burned willfully.
With his medal, with the thing that he held on to.
He, in his mind, Vincent had achieved what he desired in life, which was for his name to go down into history.
Oh, dude.
For his name to live up to the reputation of his genetics. Once Vincent had accomplished that, Jerome's got no reason to live. And right before Vincent left, he's like, what did you do? He's like, I left. This is enough for 2 lifetimes of samples. And he was like, yes, I'm going on a trip too. So yeah, there's this imagery of the sacred, the Christian Vincent beat the secular, that, and it's imagery, and that's what I'm saying. This movie is so complex, it's so rich.
The fact
it's so rich.
That totally flew past my head about that. Like him I had the idea of him going to heaven. I did not even think about Jerome and he said, I'm going on a trip too. Yeah. And they're just going into, oh man.
They're going in opposite directions.
Now I have to watch the movie again with that in mind. Cause that's how you end it.
Or Vincent the free man who's a slave. He's a slave to the system. It's a lot of this. It's rich. It's really rich. Getting back to the actual quote, like the way that they scripted it, his struggle with leaving the planet was because he had fallen in love. It was Uma, because like ultimately his goal was to go to space. And so like he's achieving this lifelong goal that he's always had. And so like that's his goal. But now that he's finally achieving this goal, it's like, wow, I finally met someone, and then she was willing to accept him. He accepted her. When she said, hey, I got this genetic flaw, you don't want nothing to do with me, but here, if you want to see for yourself, she gives him the hair and he looks at it. He goes, the wind caught it. And this is when she's subtly having these suspicions about him being a borrowed ladder.
Right.
She's not quite sure, because every time she thinks it, something happens. they're going to line everybody up and take blood intravenously. And he walks out of the doctor's office after he switched to blood vial, and she goes, "So you didn't do it after all, huh, Vincent? Huh, Jerome?" And so so like she's got these. She's like, in her mind, she's hit the lottery because she sees Jerome's genetics and she thinks this is the ideal man. And so I think that this was that's kind of the way that they were playing it. Like, as soon as he achieves his dream to leave the planet and go to the heavens, he finds a reason that holds him back and makes him want to stay. And again, I just think it's great storytelling. It's just it's just so many elements to this movie that really draws you in and really tugs away at the heart and the mind in this human, in all these variety of human ways. Like, the average human wants to be loved, and here's this guy that's been oppressed and half of his life and prevented from achieving his goals, and finally achieving his goals in all these areas. Hey, I also found a life mate, which is how they kind of played it off. How they played it didn't seem like it was just going to be a flingy thing. It seemed like it was really going to be like, hey, they had discovered the people that they wanted to permanently be with. So yeah, I enjoyed it. I love it. Great movie, great analogies. I wish more people had watched it, because like the few people, like I see Green and Handelman in there, and it's like clearly they appreciate this movie as much as me, because they're just like putting quotes in the comments and stuff.
Yeah, I've seen it.
Like, this is just a great movie. Before we close, I'm pretty sure you've seen Andrew Niccol's other movie, In Time, which is with Olivia Wilde.
A long time ago. It's so long ago I forgot about it. Like, I need to watch it again.
It's similar, but not nearly as good of a story as this one. I think the premise of the biological clocks didn't like, it wasn't as believable, but it was still a pretty good movie. A pretty good movie that everybody can live. There's enough time for everybody, but where would you put all the people?
That's
and so they come up with this elaborate system to kill some people off so that other people, the rich people, can live it up forever, kill off a bunch of poor people, and control the economy to suppress and oppress people and keep them down. This is still a good movie. It's a really good movie. I actually, after I watched Gattaca, I actually watched it again also, because I do enjoy it in spite of the fact that I don't enjoy it as much as Gattaca. I'll tell you another movie that I like a lot is The Adjustment Bureau. That's a good movie. That would be an excellent movie for Real Reviews.
Are you putting that down for your next review?
Hey, whenever you're ready, man, let me know. We can like, that's another one of those movies, and we can get all the Calvinists and the non-Calvinists in the house, because it's God writing scripts for people's lives.
Oh man. So So hey guys, I know you enjoyed this. I totally enjoyed it. I mean, Chris pointed out things to me that I didn't even think about. I mean, especially that end scene that caught me off. I was like, oh, I love when films do that. And that's just off of one watch. I bet you if I watch it multiple times like Chris did, I could find some extra stuff in there. But it was so cool, man. I want to thank you so much for being on the show, sharing your thoughts and ideas. And I'm finally glad that we finally did Gattaca. I know this was one you wanted to do. I'm glad we got to do it one-on-one. I love it when somebody shares their thoughts, their ideas, their opinions, and their feelings about a movie that really captured them. And I think it made it even more beautiful, the fact that this amount of time has passed and it was able to do one-on-one and you could really express your thoughts. So I definitely want to thank you for doing that. I want to thank everybody on the stream, on the live stream. Thank you for joining us. So here we go. So I want to thank you all for being here. Thank you for joining me on Real Reviews. God bless you guys. Take care. And make sure you guys subscribe, and make sure you share this video. And if there's anybody you want me to interview on a certain film, about their favorite film, whether it's a Christian apologist, somebody who's just into Real Reviews or talking about film, ask me, and I will try my very best. You can send that email to servantofchristministries@gmail.com. You can put a comment in the comment section below. I want to hear your thoughts. For those in the live stream, I want to thank you for all of your thoughts and your ideas. But hey, if you're watching this on the replay, make sure you put it in the comment section. I really want to hear what you think about Gattaca, or if you've never watched it, and maybe we've provoked you or pushed you to watching it. Well, with that said, I want to say God bless you guys. Make sure you join us next Monday as we are going to be reviewing a documentary for our cult season of Real Reviews called Surviving R. Kelly. You are not going to want to miss that. So with that said, God bless you guys. Take care, and we will see you on the next review. Peace.